Welcome to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. The repeal of Public Act 4, the fight against the consent agreement, as well as keeping you informed on what is going on in the leadership void as it relates to the city of Detroit. That person is Al Garrett. We have Al Garrett, the president of Michigan AFSCME Council 25, here in the studio. He has been a voice for human rights, social justice, and workers' rights, and we are going to talk to him about the effect on Public Act 4 being repealed. On the other side of this break, we'll have that conversation. City of Detroit and southeastern Michigan, many people have been asking, where are the leaders in the city of Detroit? The elected leadership seems to be sending out mixed messages on what are the priorities for turning the city of Detroit around. Well, you have one individual who may not be an elected official who's actually standing up and speaking on behalf of not just the workers of the city of Detroit, but also its citizens. We have here in the studio, and I'm glad to have him here, Al Garrett, the president of Michigan AFSCME Council 25. How are you doing, sir?
Just fine, just fine. Happy to be here.
Well, let me say this. You have just been in one fight after the next, and actually you have played a very important role in making sure when there has been questions surrounding this consent agreement and the implementing of certain laws, you've played a very important role as either an advisor or just a supporter in making sure that there's clarity in the courts. Let's talk about some of these issues, and particularly the issues surrounding the decision to craft new legislation since Public Act 4 was repealed.
Yeah, it's my understanding that, in fact, as we speak right now, there's a discussion going on at the City Council in terms of a new agreement. And the new agreement has a number of issues in it that weren't obviously in the previous agreement, but they go as far as telling the city who they have to do business with, how much the contract ought to be, and actually violating the charter of the city of Detroit. AFSCME is currently involved in terms of arguing against that, and again, contemplating, is there some legal action? One of the things that we're calling on, and we think there ought to be an investigation done by, we have now a Solicitor General.
Inspector General.
Inspector General. Well, there is a couple issues out there. For instance, this law firm, not Dykeman, but what is it?
Miller Canfield.
Miller Canfield. They're the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker in all of this. They have helped craft Public Act 4. Then they crafted the consent agreement. Now they've crafted this agreement that's now at issue. Then in the agreement, it's an obligation to pay them $1 million. Along with that, they were responsible for the bond loan that the city secured early on under this consent agreement. And they gave the city's money to Andy Dillon, who happens to be the treasurer for the state of Michigan. And so how could you beat all of that without being in conflict? And so we're going to ask this new position that just came to the city of Detroit, let's take a look at it. In addition to that, we've got folks looking at it in terms of going to the attorney grievance board, because we don't think that an attorney should be able to represent 3 entities without getting a sign-off, at least from each of those entities. And when questioned, not Dykeman again, what's the name?
Miller Canfield.
Miller Canfield. Miller Canfield, when asked by the city council, they were non-committal in terms of what their responsibility was in these many roles that they played.
So they did. So when they were asked by I guess one or more council members about their role in crafting those various agreements,
they gave a very muted answer. You know, they wouldn't confirm, they wouldn't deny. And the person who asked the question was.
But they have an obligation as lawyers.
We think so. We think so.
Yeah,
we think so. And that's one of the reasons why we're talking about let's have the grievance committee look at that to see if they're acting in a manner in which that legal canons require them to act. And so there's an interest in doing, number one, going to the Inspector General, the Attorney Grievance Board, and even, you know, when you stop and think about this, it's almost what they're accusing the former mayor of doing. is somehow Andy Dillon has cut a deal with a law firm that's guaranteeing them business, and out of it he gets control of the city of Detroit's money. And so that just doesn't seem kosher to me. And so someone ought to take a look at it. We're going to do what we can to facilitate folks taking a look at it.
But you know what I don't get is that at the core of all of this, what you're just stating, this information is also known by the members of the Detroit City Council who, as you said, is actually considering a modification to the original threat that took place with the consent agreement when they gave the threat of withholding money back then. Now they brought another threat. This sounds as if it's an extortion, and this doesn't sound like a partnership. My point is, the information that you have, the mayor and council have this information, and we'll find out by the end of this day whether or not council...
Well, let's be clear. I think the mayor is culpable in all of this. I'm, I guess, of the 60s, and I always believed in the theory of the man. You know, the man is controlling things. Well, the man has got a hold of Dave Bing. He ain't making decisions. He's just following orders. There is no way that any of this stuff could go on if he wasn't in agreement and facilitating it. As to the city council, the issue with those folks is, I think many of them just want a job. Clearly, the first agreement lessened their power. This new agreement goes even further than the first agreement, and how they have to deliberate on it to decide if they're going to approve it or not goes beyond me.
Well, by the airing of this show, hopefully there is some legal challenges, and one of the legal questions that will have to be answered is whether or not the CFO and the program manager or project manager, as titled in the consent agreement, whether or not these individuals had the authority to sign a modification to the original escrow agreement, which allows for the treasurer and the mayor to approve contracts without the approval of city council exceeding $25,000. In this agreement, it says professional services contracts does not have to have council's approval over $100,000, business service contracts over $150,000 and $250,000, and expenditures when it comes to grant dollars does not have to receive the council approval. You're absolutely correct. This agreement decimates the need for a legislative body.
And clearly, one of the things they've argued when they signed agreed to the first one was it kept their powers intact. This clearly says you no longer have powers with regards to those dollar amounts. And so how they could be confused or halfway leaning towards approving this thing just blows my mind.
Well, hopefully, as I said, by the time this show airs, that the Detroit City Council has done the right thing and called the state bluff. On the other side of this break, we're going to continue our discussion with Al Garrett here on the Jonathan Kinloch Show. Welcome back to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. Al Garrett, the need for this escrow agreement, the consent agreement, has been said that the city of Detroit needs these agreements because of the long-term debt as well as the short-term cash flow problem that the city's having. But we're continuously hearing how the state are bringing forward either amendments or initiatives that only adding to the debt. The state is saying that they need to find ways to cut expenses. The unions had presented a package of concessions totaling around $100 million.
Absolutely correct.
What happened to those cuts? I mean, what happened to the cuts in the midst of all of this discussion as it relates to a need for dollars?
Well, first, there is a fiscal crisis in the city of Detroit. But what's going on right now really isn't about the fiscal crisis. It's about who's going to run the major city in the state of Michigan. And so decisions aren't really being predicated on dollars. It's about control. Not only did we have about $100 million worth of revenue cuts in terms of concessions from our contract.
So these concessions would have added to the revenue.
Right. But in addition, we identified revenue sources. One of the things we even asked the state to do very simply was, hey, assist in the collection of taxes. There are instances where people live inside the city of Detroit, work outside, and don't have payroll deduction with the outside employer. And it becomes optional for them to provide it. What we said is, let's create a law that mandates that the payroll deductions there, requires the employer to take it. That's revenue. In addition to that, there is tons of millions of dollars of uncollected taxes. We said, hey, let's do number one. We ought to bring back the folks you laid off who were tax collectors. That's in the contract. Didn't bring them back. State didn't sign on in terms of assisting in the tax collection. In fact, if you recall, there is an attempt now to roll back the state income tax, I think another 10%, because certain provisions in the state law would meet. Now, the state can say we're trying to help Detroit. No, what they really want to do is control Detroit. And it's not about helping it. It's about what Andy Dillon and Mr. Snyder's vision is.
But you know, my big problem is that, like you said earlier, the mayor is a culprit in all of this. The mayor of the city of Detroit, and obviously the members of the Detroit City Council, do not understand, the members of council who are actually supporting this stuff, do not seem to get the nature of their offices. Their offices is to leverage the power that the people have loaned to them to benefit the citizens. But each step along these discussions center around diminishing the powers that they have to the point of turning over their role, their responsibilities to the treasurer or some other entity.
Absolutely. But one thing we have to do is be clear to the public when we say the city council. There are some folks fighting, okay?
But you know what?
But they're not the majority.
But we need to, and you're right, and we need to highlight those individuals because we need to commend individuals when they're doing what they're supposed to do, and those individuals who consistently have voted on the right side of the people. We're not saying the right side, it's very simple. Voted to do their jobs. Voted to not turn over the responsibilities of managing the city to unelected officials, which was a major reason why Public Act 4 was repealed. Those individuals are Al.
Yeah, well, you had Joanne, you have Kwame Kenyatta, you have on occasion Spivey, you have Brenda Jones. Those are primarily the players who stand up now. Once or twice somebody else may enter into it. But those four are pretty consistent in saying, hey, my role as the legislator is to be the check and balance on the mayor. And they try to exert that. Unfortunately, we got 9 of them, and 4 won't get it done. The thing that folks really need to understand is there's no magic bullet out there. That the state of Michigan had a deficit, and how did they deal with it? They raised taxes, okay? They raised taxes, reduced expenditures, and got loans. That's the same recipe that Coleman Young did back in 1981. And
that's pretty much the recipe and the ingredients of any real austerity plan.
Exactly. But there has been nothing done to raise revenue. There's been nothing done in terms of trying to loan or get loans at a reduced rate. It's only been about cutting services and workers, and it's violating the contract that the citizens have with the city of Detroit. You pay your taxes because you want services. You want your trash picked up. You want the police to respond to crime. You expect, I paid the taxes, I ought to get the benefit. Well, they're reneging on the benefit, and there's no way that we can return a healthy city with those kind of things going on.
Interesting that you mentioned the deficit and the financial struggle that former Mayor Coleman Young was faced with. Mayor Young went to the legislature and the governor to create enabling legislation to raise taxes. Exactly. Even if the state doesn't want to give us any revenue or any funding sources, funding streams out of the state's general fund, the state can create enabling legislation or create a law that will allow the citizens of Detroit to either raise taxes or they could, through the income tax or through a millage. I don't get it, Al, how they're saying that Detroit is debt-ridden, but every step of the way they're talking about floating bonds, and that only adds to the city's long-term debt that they say they're concerned about.
Exactly. And so you have to really remember that, number one, the citizens of the city of Detroit didn't ask for their taxes to be rolled back in the first place, okay? It was Mr. Engler's decision to do that. And even today, they're still talking about rolling taxes back. Now, you're saying the city's broke and there's fiscal crisis. I understand that. But you're talking about taking another 10% down? Well, doesn't that exacerbate the situation as opposed to help it? And so it's really not about restoring city of Detroit.
And let's talk about this. It's not really about helping any city, because let's talk, because yes, we're talking about Detroit because Detroit is the biggest city in the state, and as well as that's being attacked, or there seems to be some type of siege in the making as it relates to Detroit. But let's talk about revenue sharing, how the state of Michigan, part of that $1 billion surplus includes the elimination of revenue sharing that the state of Michigan did after Governor Snyder took office. So that was money that not just only was entitled to the city of Detroit, but also all cities.
No question.
All cities.
He reduced statutory revenue sharing.
Correct.
Then he turned around and reduced the foundation grant to schools as well. And so what he created...
It restored some of that.
Some of it restored, some of it doesn't get you where you were, and just the natural inflationary piece, it ought to be an increase. So what he really did was he cut those services that the citizens needed. So our schools aren't funded, our cities aren't funded, and his solution is, let's create an emergency manager. Well, fortunately, the citizens said, guess what? You went too far, we don't want that law. Even though, as we speak, they're trying to craft another law. Again, what's happening in Detroit really ain't about the fiscal crisis. It's about who's going to control the body politics in this town and what this town is going to look like 20 years out. And so what we really need from our leaders is a person that's willing to fight for this city and a person that has demonstrated a commitment to it. Dave Bing has never demonstrated a commitment and certainly hasn't fought for the city, and probably the worst mayor in my 62 years of life that's ever sat in the mayor's office.
Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the future of the city and what Detroit should look like as it moves to the elections for the city of Detroit next year. Next year, there will be an election for a mayor, 9 council members, 7 from districts, 2 citywide, as well as 7 board of police commissioners. So next year, on the other side of that election, we'll talk about what Detroit should look like. Welcome back to the Jonathan Kinloch Show. We're having a conversation with Al Garrett. And Al, leading into that last break, we were talking about the leadership in the city of Detroit, and I ended the segment talking about the new leadership and how that leadership should look on the other side of next year's election. We're entering into an election cycle, and I can't believe the votes that have been taken of recent, as well as some of the discussion that are being made by council members who I'm hearing want to run for re-election. You have a mayor who also is hinting at the possibility of imagining a run for mayor re-election, which I could not understand right now.
Well, I don't believe that they believe the citizens understand what's going on. Clearly, they have to be there. I mean, frankly, there is no way that this guy that's the mayor of the city of Detroit ought to be contemplating, thinking about, considering trying to run again. He has been totally void of leadership, and clearly the citizens are aware of it. You see how they turned out for the last election? I suspect if his name was on the ballot, we'd probably get that same turnout.
But Al,
to repudiate his leadership.
But Al, there may be an earlier instance, but that the people may be able to weigh in on whether or not he even continues his term. There is an initiative being led by State Representative John Alumba to recall the mayor. Now, there are some individuals who are saying, well, why should we do that? Hell, we won't have a city if we allow the mayor to continue to move along the tracks that he's headed in.
I'm aware of that, and while I probably share the opinion of the former group, the reality is every day that he's there is one day more detrimental to the city of Detroit. So God bless Alumba. If he can get the signatures, hey, let's do it. In the meantime, though, I think what we still need to do is mobilize in this community and put the pressure on those folks that are elected at the city council level to actually stand up on behalf of the citizens.
But you know, the danger of elected individuals who say, I'm going to only serve one term. I'm always afraid of individuals when they say they're going to serve one term, because look at where we are right now. There is a hint that there's some individuals who are saying they're not going to run for re-election, and we see that they're voting against the interests of the citizens of the city of Detroit.
But those folks, for instance, and I like calling names, if you're talking about a Gary Brown, guess what? He couldn't get reelected, so thus I'm not going to run again. He has truly exposed himself to be something other than a person that works on the behalf of the citizens. I think I've heard Pugh say that thing, too, that he wasn't going to run. Hadn't said he wasn't going to run for mayor, however, okay? And so,
especially if Alumba gets enough signatures to recall, he'll have that taste of that office.
Exactly. So the fact that some folks aren't seeking office is more of their concern on where they would be if, in fact, they sought office. I don't think the public would be sympathetic towards Gary Brown at all. I think he rode in the Kwame Kilpatrick situation to that seat. They now see that Kwame probably should have fired him. Certainly, if he worked for me, I'd fire him too. And I don't have a girlfriend or any of that. He was just a disaster.
Absolutely, and I don't know. A couple of weeks ago, his name was mentioned in the newspaper of saying that he should be considered to be chief of police.
Again, you got to look at who's the messenger. Okay, again, the newspaper are the same folks who welcome this Public Act 4, who welcomes the consent agreement and all of that. Again, they're not concerned about the folk who live in this town. They have an agenda, and it's not about saving Detroit for Detroiters. It's about some other plan that they've yet to divulge.
Well, you know, we briefly talked about the council race. There's the council race, but I want to talk about the unions, and a lot of times the unions have supported these candidates because they say they're going to win anyway. That obviously is not a way to move forward based upon what has happened from that last decision to do that with this current council. You have a mayor. You have a mayor's race. It's going to be very, very competitive. You have Mike Duggins is mentioned as a candidate. You also have Dave Bing, and you have Tom Barrow, who received the union's endorsement last time, Benny Napoleon, and Lisa Howes, a host of names. And how are you all going to vet these candidates?
Well, we're going to do the screening process.
But is it going to be a united piece, or are you at least having that conversation?
It's very difficult to get union, sort of like trying to get churches together, trying to get union folk together. Frankly, I guess I take part of the blame for the city council. I did a lot of effort on the part of that Chantel person, and she's been absolutely a disaster. But we're going to sit down and try to have that discussion and have one candidate. But our history hasn't proven that we do that successfully.
Well, Al Garrett, I want to thank you for coming on. You're going to be back because this issue is not going to go away, and your leadership is always going to be standing out front. And I want to thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you, John.
I know of no safe repository but the ultimate power of society, but the people. And if we think them not enlightened enough, the remedy is not to take power from them, but to inform them by education. That's what I hope we do here each week on the Jonathan Kinloch Show, educate you and inform you on all of these issues. Until next week, have a great week.